Mochi Health is here to help you start your weight loss journey with caring, personalized support. Meet one-on-one with board-certified obesity doctors and registered dietitians who truly listen and understand your unique needs. Eligible patients can access affordable GLP-1 medications delivered right to their door each month. No insurance? No problem. Mochi Health accepts FSA and HSA, making care accessible and affordable. And with 24/7 customer service, you'll never feel alone on your path to better health. Get started with Mochi Health today. Take the free quiz at joinmochi.com and use code AUDIO40 at checkout for $40 off your first month of membership. That's joinmochi.com with promo code AUDIO40.
Are you feeling stuck in your career or lacking employment at the moment? Experiencing symptoms of job dissatisfaction? You might be suffering from a common condition known as career stagnation. But don't worry, there's a solution. Monster.com. Monster.com offers a comprehensive suite of career-boosting tools designed just for you. Our free resume review and AI interview prep tool will help you stand out from the crowd. Need more guidance? Dive into our career advice articles for expert tips and insights. And don't forget to check out our salary tools to ensure you're getting paid what you're worth. Side effects may include a new job, increased confidence, and a brighter future. Consult Monster.com today and take the first step towards your new career. Ready for your next job opportunity? Visit Monster.com now.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
Today on The Prosecutors, we delve into an old mystery, the Eilean Mòr lighthouse disappearance, where 3 lighthouse keepers disappeared without a trace. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are so glad to have you join us again as we dive into the Eilean Mòr lighthouse disappearance. I'm Alice, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host, Brett.
Hello everybody. It's great to be here, Alice.
I'm so glad you're there. So we are currently sitting in our separate locations recording, because we are kind of still in the midst of a pandemic right now.
Yes, exactly.
Or at least I don't know where you are. I'm at home.
The endless pandemic. Yes, I'm at home. I'm here in my makeshift studio. Wishing, as I say, I feel like every episode that we could be together. But, there's a lot of people going through a lot of things that are much worse than what we're going through. So I'm just going to be thankful that we are able to record together even as the pandemic continues.
I agree. Well, today we are going to be delving into a really interesting mystery that occurred in 1900, actually. And it takes place at the Eilean Mòr lighthouse. Now, I say Eilean Mòr. I don't know. What do you say?
I would also say the Eilean Mòr lighthouse. This is in Scotland. So, if there's anybody from Scotland listening and you want to...
I was about to do a Scottish accent, but I quickly decided not to do that.
There you go. Well, so Eilean Mòr is one of the Flannan Isles. I think it's Flannan, I assume. In the...
I think that sounds right.
Outer Hebrides? Hebrides? Probably Hebrides.
Hebrides. It's in Scotland.
It's in Scotland. I just need to start cutting out this part.
No, I think it's great.
But yes, so... Exactly. And this is, we did the Elisa Lam story, and my wife listened to it and thought I sounded like I was depressed. So we decided to do an uplifting story where 3 people died, but at least it was, 120 years ago.
Well, we don't know if they died, right? We just know
I think they're probably dead by now.
Well, they're dead by now. That's fair.
But yeah, we don't actually. I guess we don't know if they died. That's a good point. I should not assume anything.
Well, and I do have to say, the picture we have of them, since it's from 1900 or prior to that, is black and white. They three are like really rocking the mustache.
Oh, they are.
These are like handlebar mustaches that are people will envy. And I'm pretty sure, I don't know about you, but a lot of people are growing out their facial hair for the pandemic. And this pretty much, shuts down every handlebar mustache I've seen on Instagram.
Absolutely. Yeah, these guys knew how to do it. They weren't playing around. And it's just a mustache, They're keeping them trim. And I mean, the guy in the middle in particular, I really like his. This is really lustrous.
Kind of looks like a broom.
Yeah. Exactly.
So let me tell you about the three guys we're talking about. So there are three lightkeepers on this island. It's Thomas Marshall, who at the time of the disappearance is 28 years old. James Ducat, who is 43 years old. And Donald MacArthur, who's 40.
Yeah, and these guys were all experienced lighthouse men. It's funny, you forget that back in the day, people had jobs like this where they just lived on a rocky outpost in the middle of the ocean and tended a lighthouse for months on end. I mean, people were just tougher back then. I can't imagine.
Well, two of these three guys had families that they just leave for extended periods of time.
Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, just saying like, bye, honey, I'll see you in 3 months. I'm off to the lighthouse. That's crazy. And to think just there were people who did this, all over the world. But these three gentlemen were, and these guys, they were in, you talk about an out of the way place. I mean, this is a tiny little island. This island was 800 by 500 yards. So we're talking just a rock jutting out of the North Sea, which is one of the most violent, unpredictable areas in the world. And these guys are sitting on that rock, manning this lighthouse so that ships are safe. I mean, in a real way, these guys are heroes. I mean, there's no telling through the work they did how many lives they saved. But we'll just dive into the story. And this is a story this is one of those stories that kind of got me into this stuff. Like, I really love mysteries. And, you go from mysteries like this into sort of the true crime arena, and they have a lot in common. And this is really like a historical mystery that has fascinated people for forever. And because it's 120 years old and because it's so evocative, there's the story and then there's the legend. But we're going to tell you the legend first, and then you can just turn us off if you want to, and you can just have the legend as your reality, because after we tell the legend, then we're going to get into sort of what really happened. And sometimes the truth's not as fun as the fiction, but and the legend that we're going to tell you is actually, if you go to Historic UK, their website, their tourist website, this is the story they tell you, which I think is kind of funny. So the official sort of government position on what happened is this story, but it all started back in December 1900. So it's the 26th of December. It's the day after Christmas. It's Boxing Day in the UK. And you've got a ship on its way to Eilean Mòr to check on the lighthouse keepers. Essentially, the lighthouse, it's a very important lighthouse. Ships are always passing by here. And occasionally, those ships will report something unusual. And in this case, it's the fact that the lighthouse doesn't appear to be on, which is a big deal. That's sort of the whole point of having the lighthouse. So you got this ship that's going out to Eilean Mòr. It's going to check on these lighthouse keepers, going to see what's going on this island. And it's an island that's been part of sort of local lore for a very long time, going all the way back to the darkest days of prehistory, when people viewed this island as sort of a sacred place, a place where the spirits dwelled, a place where really you shouldn't be. And this is the place where they built this lighthouse. So the ship pulls up, gets to Eilean Mòr, and the captain, he does what he always does. He blows his horn. And what's supposed to happen is the people on the lighthouse are supposed to have like raised flags to sort of acknowledge that they know that the ship's here and they're going to meet them and all this other stuff. But instead, there's no response. So a gentleman named Joseph Moore, who was actually a lighthouse keeper himself, rows ashore by himself, lands on the island, goes up some stairs that led to the top of the island where the lighthouse is. And he talks about how he had this overwhelming sense of foreboding as he's making this long walk up these stairs to the top of the cliff.
And it makes sense that he would, right? Because so far we know that the lights haven't been coming on and they blew their horn and there's no response. There's nothing else on this island. There's no way they can miss that a boat's coming for them. And, if I were on an uninhabited island, I'd be jumping at the chance to see someone.
And if I were Moore, I would be like, hey, I'm not going out there alone. I mean,
definitely not.
This is definitely one of those situations where, some people have experienced this. I don't know that I've ever really experienced this where you're walking into a situation that something is really wrong, and you're bracing yourself for that fact. And I got to feel like that's what's going on here. It's the 26th. The folks who are on the mainland, they keep a lookout too on this island and regularly report whether or not everything seems to be going fine and whether the light's on. And the island's been shrouded in fog for like weeks, and so nobody's seen the light. And then this boat arrives and nothing. So he's got to just be feeling this overwhelming sense of dread. So he gets up to the top and he goes to the lighthouse, and he knows immediately something's wrong. So the door to the lighthouse is unlocked. In the entrance hall, 2 of the 3 oilskin coats are missing. He goes into the kitchen where he finds half-eaten food and overturned chairs, if someone just jumped up from the seat in a hurry. And the kitchen clock has stopped. So all the sort of weird things you would expect from finding this bizarre situation. So he looks around the lighthouse. He can't find anything. No sign of the keepers. So he goes as fast as he can back down the island to get to the ship, so that Captain Harvey, who's on the ship, can send out a bigger group of people than just him, to search for the missing men. This search party lands on the island. They begin the search, but they don't find anybody.
Continuing on, Captain Harvey quickly sends a telegram to the mainland, and this was then forwarded to the Northern Lighthouse Board headquarters in Edinburgh. And this telegraph reads, I'm going to read you the whole telegraph because
That's
it's the close.
By the way,
is it Edinburgh?
Isn't it Edinburgh, Scotland? Edinburgh.
Probably. You know how good I am at pronouncing things.
I mean, it looks like Edinburgh.
Man, way to call me out. I thought I was doing great on that word. That was a joke. I definitely know it's pronounced Edinburgh.
Yeah, we're just throwing in mispronunciations on purpose now, just to keep our streak alive.
That's right. So in Edinburgh, I'm going to read the whole telegraph, though, because it's kind of the closest in time writing that we have. He's writing this in real time, trying to figure out what's happening. And
we're actually going to read a lot of things to you guys today, because one thing we've noticed about this story is people want it to be mysterious, and I get that, and they want it to be sort of shrouded in mystery. And so what they don't often do is give you the primary sources for this story. So we're hoping that by actually reading through some of this stuff, you guys will have a better sense of what actually was going on back in 1900.
And also because, as you'll see, there are so many inconsistencies in stories that we don't want to insert our own inconsistencies. So it's better, I think, if you hear from the source. Okay, so this telegraph reads, "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall, and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but, as no response was made, managed to land Moore, who went up to the station but found no keepers there. The clocks were stopped, and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows. They must have been blown off over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. Night coming on, we could not wait to make something as to their fate. I have left Mòr, MacDonald, buoy master, and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make other arrangements. Will not return to Oban until I hear from you. I have repeated this wire to Moorhead in case you are not at home. I will remain at the telegraph office tonight until it closes, if you wish to wire me.
I think it's interesting that poor McDonald just gets called the occasional in this one.
I know.
They don't even use his name, which occasional is like a rank in the lighthouse keeping world, I guess. It's, the other guys are like master lighthouse keepers and he's an occasional. So anyway.
And one thing I noticed too here is in the telegraph, he says that the clocks, plural, were stopped, not just one clock. Which if one clock were stopped, and I don't know if this is a typo at the time or not, but if one clock were stopped, to me it might not be as strange. Maybe it wasn't wound or whatever. But if all the clocks are stopped, I don't know. That sticks out to me. So a few days later, Robert, is it Muirhead?
I think it's. I would have gone with Moorhead. I think it's Moorhead.
Okay.
Let's just go with.
Okay,
Moorhead.
we're gonna go with Moorhead.
It's Oban, by the way, not Oban. I did notice that.
Come on, man! I was trying my best.
It's okay.
Look,
it's basically a foreign
fun.
country. I mean, it is a foreign country. Anyway.
It is a foreign country, and in my
Same
defense,
language,
I've never been there. I've never been there. Same
I have
language.
bought Scotch in the Oban distillery, so
Wow. I do like Scotch, so that's kind of embarrassing for me then. So a few days later, Robert Moorhead, the board's head, who both recruited and knew all 3 of these lightkeepers personally, departed for the island to investigate their appearances. I mean, if I were him, I'd feel some responsibility because, as we were talking earlier, it's a hard job to be this lightkeeper, and he personally recruited these guys, and now they're missing. And when he investigated the lighthouse, he also found nothing over and above what Mòr had already reported. That is, he does find the lighthouse log, which has some interesting things in there.
And so this is where, if we were a better produced podcast, we would start to play sort of ominous music in the background. So Moorhead, he reads these entries in the log because obviously he thinks maybe the log will tell me something. And he discovers that the last few entries are quite unusual. So on the 12th of December, Thomas Marshall, the second assistant, wrote of, quote, severe winds, the like of which I have never seen before in 20 years, which, once again, I mean, these are lighthouse keepers in the most difficult conditions in the world. So if he's saying it's something he's never seen before, that tells you something. He also notices and talks about the fact that James Ducat, the principal keeper, had been, quote, very quiet, and that the third assistant, William MacArthur, had been crying. Now, what's really weird about that last bit is MacArthur, he's a seasoned mariner. He's a guy known on the Scottish mainland as this tough brawler, the kind of person you don't want to get in a fight with. And he is reduced to tears crying in the midst of this storm. So log entries on the 13th of December talk about how the storm is raging, that all 3 men have been praying. People question, why would these 3 lighthouse keepers who know what they're getting themselves into, who are sitting in a lighthouse that's built to withstand just about anything, why would this affect them so much? And it just makes people think this must have been, the storm of the century, right? But what's even weirder about it is if you look back into the weather, there were no reported storms in the area on the 12th, 13th, and the 14th of December when these log entries are being written. And in fact, the weather was calm, and the storms that hit the island didn't actually hit it until December 17th. The final log entry was made on the 15th of December, and it simply read, storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. What in the world does that mean?
I have no idea. I mean,
it's creepy though, right? Yeah.
And I've thought about this. I'm like, did they maybe just get their dates wrong? Because I know if I were, isolated somewhere, I might have gotten the dates wrong. But remember, this is what they do. That's why you keep a log every single day, is to record these sorts of things. And so for these seasoned lightkeepers to mess up the days by this much, it would be out of character, I would think.
Definitely. I mean, that's one of the main things they do. One of their charges is it's not only to keep the light going, which is obviously their number one duty. It's also to record weather, to record the way the seas are. I mean, this is all very important information. back at the board that the board wants. So one thing they're supposed to do is every day they're supposed to be recording wind speed, weather conditions, what the sea is doing, that sort of thing. So for them to get the dates wrong would be a very sort of fundamental error on their part.
Right. So after reading these logs, Moorhead's attention then turns to the remaining oilskin coat. Remember, there's one left that had been left in the entrance hall. So why in this bitter cold winter had one of the lighthouse keepers gone out without his coat on? And presumably 2 of them did have their coats on. And furthermore, why had all 3 lighthouse staff left their posts at the same time? This is against the rules and regulations for obvious reasons. You need someone to be keeping the light.
This question about, of all the things about this, the one thing that has always bothered me about it is this question of, why did the third person not take their coat? Because, look, I mean, this is December in the North Sea, in the Flannan Isles. Cold doesn't even begin to describe what it must be like to be on this little rock with, the winds blowing and the rain's pouring down and it's freezing cold. To be wet out there is I just can't believe anybody would do that. So to me, it's always just been very strange that this coat was left behind.
Yeah, I agree there. So further clues were found down by the landing platform. So Moorhead goes down there and he notices that there are ropes all over the rocks. Ropes that are usually used to hold down a brown crate 70 feet above the platform on a supply crane. So maybe the crate had been dislodged and knocked down and the lighthouse keepers were trying to, retrieve them when an unexpected wave came and washed them out to sea. It's not clear. But this was the first and most likely theory when Mòr saw these ropes across the rocks. And he even put this theory in his official report to the Northern Lighthouse Board. But see, the problem with this particular theory is that some people in the Northern Lighthouse Board say that doesn't make any sense, because if in fact the lighthouse keepers have been washed away by a big wave, why have none of the bodies been washed ashore? Why had one of the men left the lighthouse without taking the coat? That doesn't explain why you would run out so quickly without a coat if the 3 of you are going out to try and save this crate. And furthermore, we keep saying this, but these are 3 experienced lightkeepers. Why were they unaware about a wave? Since if they're out there, that's something that they have in mind to be looking out for. So these are the questions that the board had, and they're all good questions. The most pertinent and persistent question was around the weather conditions at the time. Because, as we've already stated, the seas should have been calm. If it's calm, there's no wave to come wash them away. And the board was sure of this because even though this is a very remote island, the lighthouse can be seen from a very nearby Isle of Lewis, and any bad weather that would have been observed from this nearby island. So, over the following decades, subsequent lighthouse keepers at Eilean Mòr, they keep staffing it because, again, it's a very important post. They've reported strange voices in the wind, calling out the names of the 3 dead men. And theories about their disappearance have ranged from foreign invaders capturing these 3 men, all the way to, again, alien abductions. So, whatever the reason for their disappearance, something or someone snatched those 3 men from the Rock of Eilean Mòr on that winter's day over 100 years ago.
So that's actually the official story, at least from the UK tourism board. So if you go online, I mean, that's essentially the story that you'll find from official sources. But here's the thing. A lot of that is sort of, I mean, like I said, this is a 120-year-old mystery. And over that time, there's been a lot of exaggeration sort of grafted onto this. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit too. So that's the legend. Now let's talk about some of the facts. And I think, what you're going to see is that a lot of the things, in particular, some of the most sort of evocative things, actually aren't all that accurate. So like I said, if you just want to stop with the legend, We'll see you next time. Have a good evening or whatever. But let's
No, Brett. People came here because they want the truth. They can handle the truth.
So let's just talk about some facts, because I think if we sort of lay down some facts about these guys and about sort of what was going on, it helps as we're sort of trying to develop a theory of what exactly happened here. So first of all, as we said before, these are very experienced people. Ducat had been chosen as the lead lightkeeper before the lighthouse was even finished construction. He had lived on Eilean Mòr for 14 months. So if there was anybody who knew about sort of weather conditions, the kind of storms you might see, wave action, all of those things, it was him. Now, the interesting thing, and Alice mentioned this a little bit earlier, Ducat and MacArthur, they're both married men. They have families back on the mainland. Marshall is single. Ducat, it's tragic sort of looking back on this, because Ducat had serious concerns about Eilean Mòr. I mean, he had spent those 14 months there, and he knew just how dangerous the island was. And he had actually told his family that he was considering resigning his position so that he did not have to go back to Eilean Mòr, because he considered it so dangerous. And he actually had to be persuaded to stay there because he was so experienced and he had so much knowledge that losing him would be a huge loss and a dangerous loss. And I think one of the things that actually kind of convinced him to come back was this notion of, if we don't have someone with your kind of experience, Eilean Mòr is dangerous. It's going to be even more dangerous for the guys who follow up. So we really need you there providing your guidance. Just to give you some more background on how dangerous this job was, the construction of the lighthouse was supposed to take 2 years. It took 4. And the reason it took 4 was because the seas were so rough and the storms were so bad and the winter was so harsh on Eilean Mòr that building this lighthouse took twice as long as people who were very experienced in the construction of lighthouses and very experienced in working in difficult conditions. Even they couldn't finish this lighthouse anywhere near in the amount of time they wanted to because of how stormy it was. Now, in the report of the events, what you hear in the legend is that, they go into the kitchen and everything's sort of astrew and there's half-eaten food and there's a chair knocked over. None of that is actually true. In some ways, it's actually even a little weirder if you look at the actual report that Mòr produced. He said the kitchen door was the only one he could open to enter the lighthouse. All the rest of the doors were locked. The outside gate was closed, which I think is interesting because, once again, when you're thinking about what happened, remember somebody took time to close and latch the gate.
It kind of is in strange juxtaposition with the coat left behind, right? Because if you think you're running out so quickly without a coat, you wouldn't close the gate.
Exactly. And this goes back to what, for me, remains the weirdest thing about this, and we'll talk about that some more as we go along. But the fact that coat was just sitting on that peg, I've always just thought that was the weirdest thing. And for exactly that reason, because the closed gate, the latched gate says, and all the closed and locked doors on the lighthouse, all of that says not emergency. The coat on the peg says emergency. So I don't know, but they found everything in the lighthouse was in proper order. There's no sign of like a struggle. There's no knocked over kitchen chair. There's no half-eaten meal on the table. Now, what they did notice was just how damaged the western landing had been from storm damage at some point on that island. So the iron railings, there's a trolley tramway, and if you look at pictures of Eilean Mòr to this day, you can see the abandoned. It's like a railroad line that ran from the landing up to the lighthouse, so they could sort of push all their supplies on this railway line. The iron railings of that tramway had been actually taken up from their foundations. You just imagine what that must have taken. They were broken in several places. That box that Alice was talking about had vanished, even though it had been firmly wedged into a crevice and anchored. It would have taken a massive force to move that box, and yet it's gone.
So, Robert Moorhead, again, he's the superintendent in charge of the lighthouse. And he confirms Mòr's account, adding that the dishes have been washed, the kitchen's clean, so everything is kind of in its place. And he also wrote that the crane platform above the western landing was fine, but that a life buoy had also disappeared. So after he examined the ropes, he says that, quote, "It was evident that the force of the sea pouring through the railings had, even at this great height, which is 110 feet above sea level, torn the life buoy off the rope. Moorhead saw that the morning's work on the lamp had been completed, but it had not been lit after that." So this is how they kind of know what happened when, because there are certain steps you have to take as a lighthouse keeper, and they go all the way to preparing the lamp to be lit, but then it's not lit.
Right, exactly. And that's another thing that was in the log, was they had noted that they had done what they were supposed to do in the morning to sort of take care of the lighthouse. And I believe that is the 15th when they noted that.
Captain Harvey, remember he's the one who was captaining the boat that first found this empty island, believed that the men went missing on the 20th of December based on the logs and kind of the work that had been done. He bases this on the stopped clocks, the fact that a great storm had taken place all over the western coast on that date, and based on the logbook. It had been completed by the keepers until December 15th around noon.
And I don't really understand Captain Harvey. I get his arguments for why the 20th, but it's like to my knowledge, he never really explains how the logbooks support his position, because if they were only kept to the 15th, to me, I would think that makes the 15th the more likely date of their disappearance, but I mean, he obviously knows more than I do, so you have to give some credence to his December 20th date.
Right. And I don't know this. Maybe as lighthouse keepers, that if there's a major storm going on, maybe you put off filling in the books until then. I don't know. But, secondary sources at this time said that the weather on December 15th, the last day of the logbook being filled out, was actually calm. And the captain of the Arctur,
sure,
confirmed that the weather near the Flannan Isles were clear but stormy.
And the Arctur, however you pronounce it, that's actually the ship that went by on the 15th and didn't see the light, and so reported that when it arrived in port. So it's really one of the first sources of what was going on and why there was concern.
Right. And, despite what's written here, the light from the lighthouse had been obscured by fog for a long time at this point, because people on a nearby island were growing concerned as they didn't see, whether it was because of the fog or the light wasn't being lit. They'd been growing concerned because they hadn't seen this light for a while.
And this is one of those contradictions with what's written on the official website for the UK. I mean, they talk about how everything was fine and everybody from the island could see everything that was going on, but that's actually not true. In reality, whether there had been a storm or not, the lighthouse had been obscured by fog, and the folks who regularly were supposed to sort of, I guess it was like one of their jobs was every day or so, hey, look out towards the lighthouse and see if you can still see it. And if you can't see it, at some point you're supposed to report in. But they couldn't do that because there was so much fog, they couldn't tell if the light was on or not.
And, we've already mentioned that there are two of the men's coats were missing, but the one left behind was actually MacArthur's coat that is left on the peg inside the door, presumably the last place that he left it when he comes in. And like we said, this island's really small. It's only 800 by 500 yards. There's not many places for them to hide. So what we have here, just to give you the overarching timeline, December 15th, a passing ship notices that the lighthouse's lamp is out, and the captain reports it. 5 days later, on December 20th, the replacements are due to arrive at the lighthouse, but because of those storms we were talking about, they're delayed until December 26th, when, of course, they find no one on the island.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing that makes this whole story both kind of tragic and striking is these guys are almost done with their tour on the lighthouse. I mean, they were literally days away from being picked up and replaced. And then that's when this tragedy happens. And I think that's also something, as we talk about theories that people have, and some of the more sort of out there theories, the fact that they were so close to being relieved, the fact that they were so close to going home, I think says something about what their state of mind would have been. So let's talk about these log entries, because the log entries are just so awesome. I mean, the log entries are basically the kind of thing that you might read in a fictional account of what happened at the lighthouse. And wouldn't you know it, that's basically what they are. They're basically made up out of whole cloth. I'm sorry to report that to everybody. The first time I learned this, it really broke my heart. So I guess, like, spoiler alert. The log entries aren't real. Anyways, so the log entries first came to light in a publication in an American adventure magazine in 1929. The name of the adventure magazine was True Strange Stories. And I don't know if you guys knew these magazines existed, or if you've ever seen these magazines, but they're sort of almost like a Ripley's Believe It or Not style. So they were targeted at young men, and they told these sort of ridiculous, crazy stories. And so you'd have, like, the cover would be sort of a strapping man with, a beautiful woman sort of hanging onto him as he fights off alligators or whatever. And the headline for the front of the magazine would say something like "Survival in the Swamp," right? And they would tell these sort of ridiculous, crazy, over-the-top stories of adventure out there in the world. And you can imagine that, if you're a kid growing up in a farm in Wichita, Kansas, these magazines, this is a time when not everybody had a television. Some people had radios, but these magazines were these, almost like comic book style adventures, escapism, but they were told through this lens of, the based on a true story type thing. And so everybody knows, and everybody knows then, and everybody knows now, that the stories that were published in there were embellished often to the point of fantasy. There was always truth to it, but essentially what would happen is the story would come into these folks and they would make the story even better so that it fits sort of the feeling of their magazine. And that seems to be the case with these log entries. There is no record of them in contemporaneous reports. And look, I can guarantee you people would have noted those log entries. The logs themselves were really, as we said earlier, they weren't these narrative log entries, which is another reason people would have noticed them at the time. They really were about wind speed, weather conditions, sea conditions, sunrise, sunset, all the sort of things, the data that you could gather at this lighthouse that would be useful for mariners, around the world or whatever. The log itself actually stops around December 13th. So there are no entries in the log after December 13th. But the records up to the 15th are on a chalkboard, which they would have transferred to the log at a more convenient time. So basically, they do all their records for the day, they put them up on the chalkboard, and then at some point, when somebody has some time, they sit down and they take whatever's on the chalkboard, they enter it into the logboard, erase the chalkboard, and start all over.
You know what that kind of reminds me of? Since we're lawyers, we can, lawyers speak. If you keep time, if you have to bill your hours and you keep them on a piece of paper, because it takes, you enter them all in at the end of the week or something like that, which makes sense if you're just entering data. You don't want to forget the wind speed. You don't want to forget what time the sun rose, but you don't have to put it in the book right that second.
And that's a great example. And I bet most people in your jobs out there, you might have something similar to that where you got to put in some data at some point, but you're not doing it, continuously. You really are just sort of picking a point, either at the beginning of the week, the end of the week, whatever, to go ahead and enter it all at once. And that's essentially what they were doing here. Now, so on the 15th, what the logs actually said was the time of extinguishing the light on the 15th of December. So I guess in the morning, when the light's not as useful anymore, they would extinguish the light. Probably saves oil, probably saves wick, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's what Moorhead's referring to when he says that they had detailed their morning activities to take care of the light. And, the wind speed, that kind of thing. I think the temperature reading and the wind speed reading were taken at 9 a.m. that morning on the 15th. And those were going to be transferred to the log later. If you want to read sort of the story of this, there's a gentleman named Mike Dash who writes for the Fortean Times. And what's really interesting about this is the Fortean Times, for those of you who don't know, is a magazine of strange and unusual phenomenon. So, if you want to read about Bigfoot and UFOs and that kind of thing, the Fortean Times has it. But they also have this tradition of attempting to debunk things that are not correct. So Mike Dash actually does this. It's a great article, and it's all about the guy who started True Strange Stories and sort of how he ran that magazine. And Dash uses this in his research into the Lighthouse Keepers as an example of how that magazine was run. And so, we're going to put a link to that on the website. Check it out. Read it. I think you'll find it pretty interesting, and it goes through all this in much greater detail than we have.
So, kind of like what Brett just talked about, there's also we've already talked about the kitchen. And how in, some reports, there's complete chaos in the kitchen. But what it seems like is at the time, there was not, in fact, any chaos in the kitchen. Things had been washed. Chairs were not overturned. So where did this idea that the kitchen was in disarray come from? Well, it seems kind of like with the logs, this comes actually from a ballad by Wilford Wilson Gibson that was written in 1912. And I'm going to read it to you because you'll see how... it sounds just like the stories of what some people say was found in the lighthouse. It reads, "Yet, as we crowded through the door, we only saw a table spread, for dinner meat and cheese and bread, but all untouched and no one there. As though, when they sat down to eat, ere they could even taste, alarm had come and they in haste had risen and left the bread and meat, for at the table head a chair lay tumbled on the floor." It's a beautiful poem.
Which I just love this. It's a great poem. And Gibson actually is a pretty famous poet in the UK for things that he wrote during World War One. He wrote a lot of great stuff during World War One and about World War One. This poem's not as well known, but it's great. And it's so interesting. There is something to be done by one of you guys out there who is like a, I don't even know what you would be, but like a historian or sort of a social scientist or whatever, about how these things that are, embellishments become a part of the actual story. This guy, he read the actual story and he wrote something about it and included this very evocative idea of the kitchen in disarray. And that went from being a poem based on the real story to being the real story. And I just think that's so great. I just love that. Another thing I like, just as we're talking about poems, that I noticed, the ship that brought Mòr to the island when they discovered this was called the Hesperus. And there's a famous tragic poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow called "The Wreck of the Hesperus." It has absolutely nothing to do with the story whatsoever, but it's another one of those sort of interesting little synchronicities that I know a lot of you guys are into, and I just thought that was interesting. So, once again, when we talk about how we know what we know and when we know it, the best way to do that is to look at contemporary sources, because contemporary sources don't have the embellishments of the poem written, 12 years later. It doesn't have the embellishments of the story written 29 years later or whatever. So we'll start with, and we're going to read you some of this stuff. Like I said, we're going to put this on the website too, but I have a feeling none of you have ever read any of this or heard any of this if you're interested in the story. So we just sort of wanted to go through it. Not going to bore you to death with it, but so Mòr, he's the one who went up there. He's the first man on the island. He actually wrote a letter to the Lighthouse Board sort of describing what he saw. And so I'm just going to read you part of that letter. "Sir, it is with deep regret I wish you to learn the very sad affair that has taken place here during the past fortnight, namely the disappearance of my two fellow lightkeepers, Ducat and Marshall, together with the occasional keeper, Donald MacArthur, from off the island." So I don't know if MacArthur I don't know if occasional keeper means this is like a part-time job for him or what.
But he's important. He gave his life.
He is
for
important.
This job.
We're not shortchanging him. As you are aware, the relief was made on the 26th. That day, as on other relief days, we came to anchorage under Flandin Isles, and not seeing the lighthouse flag flying, we thought they did not perceive us coming. So ordinarily, you'd be flying your flag over there at the at the lighthouse. The steamer's horn was sounded several times, still no reply. At last, Captain Harvey deemed it prudent to lower a boat and land a man if it was possible. So, you had that ship report that the light's not on the 15th, but I guess even at that point, they weren't that concerned. They were supposed to replace them on the 20th. They got there on the 26th. So I think even at this point, when they got there, they didn't know what they were walking into until they didn't see that flag flying, and then they saw no reply. I was the first to land, leaving Mr. McCormick and his men in the boat till I should return from the lighthouse. So there you go, Mòr. Striking off on your own. I went up, and coming to the entrance gate, I found it closed. I made for the entrance door leading to the kitchen and storeroom, found it also closed, and the door inside that. But the kitchen door itself was open. On entering the kitchen, I looked at the fireplace and saw that the fire was not lighted for some days. I then entered the rooms in succession, found the beds empty, just as they had left them in early morning. So once again, gates closed, doors are closed. The only door that's open is the kitchen door.
You know what stands out to me, though, is as he's writing this, and he may, it might be just a professional letter, but he doesn't have that sense of foreboding, it doesn't seem. He's kind of, it's pretty, he's just going up to do his duty as opposed to, the kind of the lore that he walked up the stairs and felt this foreboding.
Well, that's true. And that is an interesting question about how he actually felt and whether this is just sort of that, stiff upper lip Englishness or what. I did not take time to search further, for I only too well knew something serious had occurred. I darted out and made for the landing. When I reached there, I informed McCormick that the place was deserted. So yeah, I think you're right. I think he didn't have so much foreboding as he had concern, and once he felt that concern, he went to get, the rest of the men. He with some of the men came up second time so as to make sure, but unfortunately the first impression was only too true. Mr. McCormick and myself proceeded to the light room where everything was in proper order. The lamp was clean, the fountain full, blinds on the windows, etc. We left and proceeded on board the steamer. On arrival, Captain Harvey ordered me back again to the island, accompanied with Mr. McDonald, buoymaster, A. Campbell, and A. Lamont, who were to do duty with me till timely aid should arrive. So, this, at the end of the day, got to keep the lighthouse. Like, whatever's happened to these guys, the most important thing is we got to keep that lighthouse going. We went ashore and proceeded up to the light room and lighted the light in the proper time that night and every night since. The following day, we traversed the island from end to end, but still nothing to be seen to convince us how it happened. Nothing appears touched at East Landing to show that they were taken from there. Ropes are all in their respective places in the shelter, just as they were left after the relief on the 7th. So based on this, I think you can pretty much rule out the idea that something crazy happened on the East Landing. But then, as Moore said, and as we've talked about earlier, on West Side, it is somewhat different. I love that sort of understated, somewhat different. We had an old box halfway up the railway for holding West Landing mooring ropes and tackle, and it has gone. Some of the ropes, it appears, got washed out of it. They lay strewn on the rocks near the crane. The crane itself is safe. The iron railings along the passage connecting railway with footpath to landing had started from their foundation and broken in several places. Also, railing, round crane, and handrail for making mooring rope fast for boat is entirely carried away. Now, there is nothing to give us an indication that it was there the poor men lost their lives, only that Mr. Marshall has his sea boots on and oilskins. Also, Mr. Ducat has his sea boots on. He had no oilskin, only a waterproof coat, and that is away. Donald MacArthur has his wearing coat left behind, which shows, as far as I know, that he went out in shirt sleeves, which, once again, in shirt sleeves in this
very
environment.
Cold.
Very cold. He never used any other coat on previous occasions, only the one I am referring to. Mr. J. Moore, Assistant Lightkeeper, Flannan Island's Lighthouse, 28th of December, 1900.
So written 2 days after he found this.
Exactly.
So very close in
This
time.
is as contemporaneous as you get, and you can already see sort of, the unusual things we've talked about. And this is a serious deal for the Lighthouse Association, and they launch an investigation to try and figure out what happened and to prevent it from happening again. And they actually, at the conclusion of that investigation, issue a report in 1901.
So they like Brett said, they take this very seriously. They get right out to the island. We know that Moorhead lands a few days later, and he does a thorough investigation. And he produces this report just about 2 weeks after the men are found to be missing. So I'm going to read you a few excerpts, and you guys can, of course, read this on the website too, but I think these are helpful in understanding our discussion here. So from this report, Moorhead writes, "The men left on the island made a thorough search in the first place of the station and found that the last entry on the slate had been made by Mr. Ducat, the principal keeper, on the morning of Saturday, 15th December. Again, on the slate, so it hadn't been transcribed into the logbook. The lamp was crimmed, the oil fountains and canteens were filled up, and the lens and machinery cleaned, which proved that the work of the 15th had been completed. The pots and pans had been cleaned and the kitchen tidied up, which showed that the man who had been acting as cook had completed his work, which goes to prove that the men disappeared on the afternoon which was received, after news of the disaster had been published, that Captain Holman had passed the Flannan Islands in the steamer the Arctur at midnight on the 15th ulto, and could not observe the light. He felt satisfied that he should have seen it. So that's how he decides timing-wise.
Yeah, and I think, once again, you've got the captain of the Hesperus or whatever who he thought it happened on the 20th. I think Moorhead's probably right. I think this, based on everything we've seen, this happened on the 15th.
So the report goes on to say, owing to the amount of sea, I could not get down to the landing place, but I got down to the crane platform 70 feet above the sea level. The crane originally erected on this platform was washed away during last winter, and the crane put up this summer was found to be unharmed, the jib lowered and secured to the dock, and the canvas covering the wire rope on the barrel securely lashed around it. And there was no evidence that the men had been doing anything at this crane. And this pretty much is confirmed by the letter that Brett just read. The mooring ropes, landing ropes, derrick landing ropes, and crane handles, and also a wooden box in which they were kept, and which were secured in a crevice in the rock 70 feet up the tramway from its terminus, and about 40 feet higher than the crane platform, or 110 feet in all above the sea level, had been washed away. And the ropes were strewn in the crevices of the rocks near the crane platform and entangled among the crane legs, but they were all coiled up, no single coil being found unfastened. I'm going to stop there really quick because I read you all of that kind of very technical detail about how high these ropes were tied up and whatnot to show that this seemed to be a very thorough investigation that he did.
So yeah, you got this box. It's 110 feet up. That's pretty high if you're thinking about whatever happened here. So the ropes get knocked out, but they stay coiled. I don't know. I mean, it's just a weird thing that the ropes were still coiled even though they'd apparently fallen 110 feet or whatever. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but I just think it's weird.
And along with that, if it were a wind that blew them down, you would think the wind that could blow down, this secured crane box would also uncoil the ropes, right? I mean, I know ropes are heavy, but still, they're also secured very well. And here's another thing. This crane had been washed away last winter, so they knew what they were dealing with, and they knew how to secure things. Right. So I think likely that it meant the weather was quite bad.
Exactly. Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, so the report says, the iron railings around the crane platform and from the terminus of the tramway to the concrete steps up from the west landing were displaced and twisted. A large block of stone weighing upwards of 20 CWT, which is 100 weight. One British 100 weight weighs 112 pounds.
Yeah, because it can't just weigh 100 pounds,
I think it's actually us who have the problem with our measurement system. But anyways, that this very heavy stone had been dislodged from its position higher up and carried down to and left on the concrete path leading from the terminus of the tramway to the top of the steps. Yeah,
I mean, once again, we're talking over 2,000 pounds. This stone weighed over 2,000 pounds. Over 2,200 pounds, as a matter of fact. And
I mean, if in fact this were a wind that carried a 2,000-pound rock, then even if I were a big burly man, would probably be crying.
Yeah, that's true.
Remember, that wasn't actually written in the logbook, but I would be crying. So, just a bit more of this report. A life buoy fastened to the railings along this path to be used in case of emergency had disappeared, and I thought at first that it had been removed for the purpose of being used, but on examining the ropes by which it was fastened, I found that they had not been touched. And as pieces of canvas was adhering to the ropes, it was evident that the force of the sea pouring through the railings had, even at this great height, remember it's 110 feet above sea level, torn the life buoy off the ropes. I think this is super interesting because when I hear a life buoy is like a lifeboat is missing, I think, oh, of course, these guys just took the boat. But what he's saying in the report here is no, it wasn't untied to be used. It was actually ripped from its secured place.
Right. And this is something that I don't think I've ever read before. or heard before looking at the actual report. I don't think I'd ever heard an explanation of what happened with the life buoy, and I had just always assumed, like he initially assumed, that probably what happened is one of them was trying to use it to save somebody else. But it sounds like, no, that's not what happened. It was just torn off where it was kept.
Couple more paragraphs of this report. After a careful examination of the place, the railings, ropes, etc., and weighing all the evidence which I could secure, I am of opinion that the most likely explanation of the disappearance of the men is that they had all gone down on the afternoon of Sunday, 15th of December, to the proximity of the west landing to secure the box with the mooring ropes, etc., and that an unexpectedly large roller had come up on the island, and a large body of water going up higher than where they were and coming down upon them, had swept them away with resistless force. I was with the keepers for more than a month during the summer of 1899, when everyone worked hard to secure the early lighting of the station before winter, and working along with them, I appreciated the manner in which they performed their work. I visited Flannan Islands when the relief was made so lately as 7th of December, and had the melancholy recollection that I was the last person to shake hands with them and bid them adieu. Robert Moorhead, Superintendent, the 8th of January, 1901. This last paragraph is the first time he kind of breaks away from just a cold recitation of the facts and evidence to kind of show that, like, he knew these men. He saw them very recently, and he respected them as lightkeepers. He knew they were good at their jobs.
Right. I think one thing that definitely comes through in this is whatever happened, Moorhead didn't think it was to any discredit of any of these men. Like he talked about earlier, when they were hit, in his opinion, by that wave, it was a resistless force, and these guys were doing their jobs and they were doing their duties. And, it's a very poignant ending to the way he does that report. And he didn't have to do that. He could have just left it sort of cold and analytical as it had been throughout the report. And so, I'm glad you went ahead and read that paragraph, because I think it does speak to sort of the humanity of these guys and what they went through. So now that we've looked at that, we have the facts. We have all the facts. Basically, you have all the facts you're ever going to have in this case. Really, these two letters, or the letter and the report, that's the main thing in this case. And so I think now that you have that, we can all sort of together go through the possible theories of what happened to these gentlemen. And maybe come to, I don't know that we'll ever know for certain, but come to a conclusion that I think at least is likely. So we'll start off first with the most unlikely of possibilities, but since it was mentioned earlier, why not talk about it? Aliens. Were these men abducted by aliens? What do you think, Alice? Were they abducted by aliens?
For sure.
For sure.
Probably not.
No.
The only thing that I could think of potentially is, no, I can't.
Yeah. I admit, I have often ran in paranormal circles. I enjoy paranormal stuff, but I don't know a lot about aliens. Do aliens abduct people and never bring them back? I always thought aliens kind of took you for a little while and then dropped you back off, like in your bed or something.
They borrowed you so you can come back and tell them about what great wonders there are out there.
Exactly. Like the only thing I can remember, I know in the X-Files, Mulder. Man, it's been a long time since I've seen that show. Scully and Mulder. Anyway.
Yeah, it's Mulder.
His sister was abducted and never brought back. So maybe that is something that happens. But anyway, I think in this case, we have a lot of plausible theories that are better than aliens. So I think we can just go ahead and just discard aliens as a theory. If anybody wants to write in, prosecutorspod@gmail.com and let us know why it really was aliens, we'd love to read it.
So the second one second theory is that they ran off to start new lives. Now, I think this would be more appealing if the lifeboat had not just been ripped off of its secured place by the waves. But these guys knew what they were doing. They were about to end their tour of duty. Two of them had families. There's no indication that they didn't want to go back to their families. I think it would be very unlikely to get three men on board to all run away together. And where would they go? There's not many places to go.
Yeah, this is one of those, and it's funny. every time, if you ever have a missing person case, there are always people who think, well, they ran off to start new lives, right? It's such a popular thing. And I don't know if that speaks to sort of our own psychology where secretly everybody wants to run off and start a new life and get away from their life or whatever. But yeah, you always had that. But no, I mean, look, there's no evidence that these guys would have done this. And like you said, I mean, if there were one guy, maybe, but all three of them just decided, this has been fun. We turned off the light this morning. Let's just leave. Let's just go, let's sail to France or whatever. Yeah, I don't think that happened. Sort of other mysterious theory that was mentioned on the UK website. The island took them. The spirits of the island came and got them. And look, this is a legend shrouded island, Eilean Mòr. Shepherds used to graze on that island. And one thing they always made sure of is they were out by nightfall because you didn't want to be there when the sun set. And, there was a feeling among locals that the island was a place to be avoided and respected, and that the building of this lighthouse was an affront to these spirits, and that at the end of the day, the island itself, the spirits on the island, struck these men down as punishment for their hubris coming to the island. Look, I like ghost stories as much as anybody. The problem with that is, why'd they wait till December 15th? I mean, they built this island for 4 years. You'd think you'd go after the people building the island. Number one. Number two, they'd been there for a while. Why didn't they do it earlier? If you're giving the spirits credence here, I don't really understand why the spirits waited until until this moment to take action. These guys have spent a lot of nights on the island, And
a lot of people have gone to this island too, right? Like Moorhead had been there previously, and no one's ever reported that there have been strange supernatural things happening on the island.
Right. And, immediately after these guys disappeared, it wasn't like they abandoned the island. They just put new people on it, and those people didn't disappear. So, I guess maybe the spirits, the blood of these three men appeased the spirits, and from that point on, people could live on the island or something. I don't know. But if this were a case where there was literally no evidence of what happened to these guys, maybe. But I think we can probably, as much as I hate to do it, I think we can probably rule out spirits on the island.
I'm with you, Brett. So another theory then is that this was a botched rescue. One or maybe two of the men went in and the rest followed trying to save him. And now this explanation would explain why the box with the mooring ropes was missing, because maybe the guy went after the ropes, but it really doesn't explain why two of the men were outside in the weather with their coats, but one was not. And it also doesn't help that we can't find the bodies, because the idea would be they were washed away or they tried to rescue them right there on the landing, and very likely their bodies would be close by.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, and it is an enduring mystery about why none of the bodies were ever found. And I think a lot of people just think of, hey, it's the ocean, it's big. You go in the ocean, you're never going to be seen again. But in reality, like you said, if you're drowning pretty close to land, your body's going to be carried into land. And even if a couple of the bodies never surfaced, it's weird that none of the bodies ever surfaced. So you would think if literally sort of one of them goes in with their heavy coat and everything, it's going to be very difficult for them to get out without help by somebody else. But yeah, you would think if other people went in, those bodies would be on the rocks. You just feel like you would find them. Which is why I think this is probably my theory at the end. I think the rogue wave theory is probably the best theory. And it's funny because this is a 120-year-old mystery. I'm pretty sure they solved it in the report. When Moorhead talks about that roller coming through, I mean, he's talking about a huge wave. There's been recent research done by a researcher named James Love, who found out that Marshall, who was one of the keepers, had previously been fined 5 shillings when part of the equipment was washed away during a big storm. And that's one of the things that happened. We read earlier about how the crane was washed out to sea. It may not seem fair, but, if you were on duty and something like that happened, a lot of times you're the one who ended up having to pay for at least part of it. So I think what happened here probably is that Marshall and Ducat, they know the storm's not there. We know that it wasn't storming on the 15th, but they have a feeling a storm is coming, and they're right. There's a huge storm that hits just a few days later. And so remembering what happened, remembering how part of their stuff had been washed away, they go down to try and secure it, to make sure it's even more secure than it already is. And this is just one of the things they're going to do that day. It's a relatively nice day. They're going to do it. And when they do, essentially a rogue wave comes through, and we know based on the way this island is built that rogue waves are more likely, just because of the way the island, it channels water in a certain way where you have these huge waves that come in and they can't be predicted. So they go down, they're on that west landing, and this huge wave, essentially a 120-foot wave, by the time it hits them, comes through, washes them away, knocks that box down, knocks that giant stone, that 2,000-pound stone, down, and they just get swept away. And the theory is that essentially MacArthur, and he's hanging out in the lighthouse because the rules say you always got to have one person in the lighthouse. And he sees the wave coming because he's got a much better vantage point than these guys do. And so he rushes out, doesn't even bother to put on his coat. He just rushes out to try and warn his colleagues, like, this huge wave is coming. You got to get out of there. And by the time he gets there, the wave's already there. He gets hit too, and he's washed away. Now, the problem with that, and we talked about this before, is so he leaves his coat on the peg, but he doesn't leave the doors open. He closes and latches the gate. I mean, would you do that? If you're running out to save your friends from a giant wave and also put yourself in danger, would you make sure that you closed and latched the gate before you made your way out? I mean, to me, that's the one thing that sort of cuts against the rogue wave theory, is the place is just a little too secure. Frankly, if that chair had been knocked over in the kitchen, I would think that would be more of a sign of this than what we actually have.
To try and make sense of that, Brett, what if, and I don't know, because I don't know what this lighthouse looks like, 120 years ago, but what if he was in so much hurry that he jumps out a window or, doesn't go through a door, jumps over a gate in order to run to his friends as quickly as possible? I don't even know if that's possible. I don't know how high the gate was and if a window was found open, but, it may be that he went so quickly that everything was left the way it was.
Right. I mean, I guess you could imagine a scenario in which he literally you know how sometimes if you throw open a door or a gate, you throw it open so much that it swings back. I mean, I guess that's possible, right? He throws open the door and rushes out, and the door slams behind him, and he does the same thing with the gate. He throws open the gate, and the gate slams behind him and sort of latches itself. I mean, I guess that's your best explanation. Is that, or like you said, he's just in such a hurry, he didn't even bother to open the gate. He's just going over it. And I don't know the answer to that question. A lot of people visit this island. It's as popular as an island in the middle of the North Sea can be, it is a popular place to visit because you have the lighthouse. It's still there. It's still operational. It's now automated, so they don't have lighthouse keepers there anymore, I think since the 70s, which, it's crazy to think about. These lighthouse keepers were there for decades doing this work. But, it'd be interesting if anybody's been there and they sort of comment on that. I think that is the outstanding piece of the puzzle, at least for me, that kind of makes me wonder about even the rogue wave theory.
And so the last theory we're going to discuss, poor MacArthur, it focuses on him because, remember, he's the one who did not bring his coat. The theory is that MacArthur went crazy. Now, MacArthur was known to be a violent man, and maybe he'd been cooped up with these two other guys for too long, and it led him to be violent. And the theory is that he killed the two men and then killed himself. Now, we've talked about this before. If there was a crime, it's really hard to commit a crime and not leave behind some sort of evidence that a crime had been committed. Murders are messy. Killing yourself is messy. Even if it is jumping off a cliff or something like that. And so we have absolutely no evidence whatsoever that these men were murdered or that MacArthur committed suicide. So on that alone, I can't say that I much believe this theory because I have nothing to support it.
I think, people love this theory. It's kind of funny how much it seems like people like this theory. And the sort of idea is he killed them, and then everything else that happened was essentially the result of things like huge waves and storms and nobody to clean anything up. So that's why all this stuff is dislodged, not because that is a result of, or that's how they died, but because they were already dead and, there was nobody there to put the ropes back in their place or whatever, right? But like you said, I mean, there's no reason to believe this, number one. And number two, they're literally 5 days away from being rescued, if you attach this, and I think this is one of the reasons people like this story so much, because if you attach this theory to the log book, then you sort of, MacArthur's over there in the corner crying, he loses his mind, the whole God is over all, the seas are calm, it's because he's murdered them and now he's going to go off and commit suicide or whatever. But I think in reality, as sexy as that theory is, there's just no reason to actually, with the logs sort of disproven, there's no reason to think that that is true. So, okay, Alice, we've laid out our theories, or we've laid out the theories. I think I've basically said what I think happened. What do you have a theory about what happened to the lighthouse keepers at Eilean Mòr?
I'm not always Eilean. I don't think I'm always going to agree with you, but in this case, I think we've both been working to debunk inaccurate information from past tellings of the story to make it more exciting and exaggerated. But at the end of the day, I think when you look at the primary sources that are close in time, namely the letter 2 days after the discovery of the disappearance and also the report just a couple weeks later, it seems like what you've laid out as the rogue wave theory is probably most likely what happened here.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think this is a mystery, actually. I think this is a mystery that's been solved. I think it was solved pretty much right after it happened. But one thing, when you think about this, just think about what these guys were going through and the sort of danger that they were putting themselves into. We talked about this earlier about how they were kind of heroes. I think they were heroes. I mean, these guys were up against 120-foot rogue waves, and they're out there trying to keep the lights on so the ships don't crash on the rocks and kill everybody on board. That was some heroic work, and it was work that lighthouse keepers were doing around the world for a very long time. Like I said, I think that this lighthouse was finally automated in the 70s. I could be wrong about that. It might have been a little bit earlier than that, but it wasn't much earlier than that. And the notion that these people would just go off to these rocks, I mean, literal just rock sticking out of the ocean, and do this work is, it is remarkable. So, while there's not much of maybe a mystery here, I think it is a story that's worth telling and retelling.
And I think shows the power of evidence versus just the best story or the story we want it to be, because oftentimes I think people fall into the trap in true crime is the story that they want it to be.
Right. And this is one, and I think the other thing with true crime is people never want to accept the fact that the case has been solved. You know what I mean? Like they just want to keep on working with it, because once it's solved, it loses so much of its magic. You know what I mean? It's the mystery that keeps them coming back. And so I think people, when you have a case like this, they almost want to avoid the facts. They almost don't want to know the facts, because then the mystery is gone. And I mean, I don't know. I don't really feel that way. And I do think this is one where if you take it one step at a time and you look at every piece of evidence and you look at exactly what we know, the story becomes pretty clear.
Well, this has been fun, Brett.
It has been fun. It's good to take a break and do a sort of a historical mystery. And we're going to do this regularly. It's not going to all just be all murder and mayhem. We're going to do some of these historical mysteries. If you have any mysteries that you're really interested in and you'd like us to look into, let us know. Because obviously there's a lot more sort of famous true crime stories than there are historical mysteries. And I love historical mysteries. So if you got some historical mysteries, I would love to hear about them. But if you enjoyed this or if you hated it or whatever, hit us up on Twitter at prosecutorspod. Same for Instagram. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Check out our website, prosecutorspodcast.com. All these documents we talked about will be up there, so you can take a look at them. And the photos, you can see those beautiful mustaches that these gentlemen have. Something to aspire to during the time of quarantine, trying to grow a mustache like a lighthouse keeper from 1900. So give that a shot, Alice. And maybe next time I see you, you will have pulled off a great mustache.
A handlebar mustache.
So that's it for today. That's it for this week. Join us next time as we're looking into a new mystery and answering new questions. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
Well, anyways, a few days later, Robert Moorhead, this board's What?
I think that's just a misspelling on my part. I'm pretty sure he's a superintendent. Banana. Super natant.
The head of the board.
Shopify is a platform built for growth, whether you're just starting out or already running a thriving business. From managing inventory to creating a seamless checkout experience, Shopify is designed to handle it all. And it doesn't stop there. Shopify helps you sell everywhere your customers are, online or in person. It's the ultimate tool for turning big dreams into big wins. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/OPP.
If you're looking to streamline your audio advertising buys and maximize your revenue, look no further than Triton Digital's programmatic audio advertising exchange, A2X. The private exchange consists of only licensed broadcasters and top-tier internet radio publishers, assuring the quality inventory and brand safety you can trust. Visit www.tritondigital.com to learn more.